Edmund read to his Evie girl often. Their bond had grown significantly since Agatha moved out. Laurel had been even more detached with the children and himself. Not that he minded anymore. The bond between the sisters was also extremely close. Catherine was very protective over her little sister and adored her. Now that Evangeline was old enough to talk and play, Catherine felt less alone while their daddy was at work. Their mother wanted nothing to do with them, and even left the toddlers in the home alone on occasion. Kate made sure Evie was taken care of. During Evie's nap time, Catherine liked to give herself makeovers, despite her young age. She wanted to be beautiful, so she stole her mother's makeup. Maybe if she was beautiful, her mother would love her. When her makeup didn't gain the attention of her mother, she made a ruckus in hopes of gaining her attention. She didn't know why her mother hated her so much. That attention was better than no attention at all. Since Laurel did not interact with the children at all while Edmund was at work, Kate taught herself how to use the potty so she wasn't stuck in a dirty diaper all day. Laurel always went back to sleep after her husband went to work. She was diligently planning how to be rid of her family while they were sleeping, so she was exhausted by the morning. Laurel had to keep up appearances so she would not tip off her husband of her plans, so she still tended to the animals on their land. Keeping them fed and healthy would also be beneficial when she would have to ultimately sell them. Laurel felt completely at peace, despite the ungodly plan she would soon enact on her family. Her life would soon be unburdened and she would have no responsibilities. She was determined to steal Nathaniel away as one last act of vengeance. After keeping his parents virtually in the dark of his entire life and marriage, he wrote a letter to them detailing everything that had happened since moving out of their home aside from Nathaniel's involvement. He couldn't ruin Agatha's life too. Writing this letter was incredibly difficult for Edmund because he had to admit to someone other than himself that his marriage was over. He asked his parents if he could bring the girls to visit soon. After writing the letter, Edmund felt lighter. He would get his affairs in order while at his parents' house so that he could safely leave his wife and make a better life for his daughters. Laurel's plan to eliminate her family and find true happiness was about to happen. She purchased herbs and spices from an illegal merchant and, if combined, would be toxic for humans to consume. She made her family an elaborate dinner that night. She poured the toxic cocktail onto the meal. She could not arouse suspicion by not partaking, so she also purchased an elixir that would cure her from consuming the food. Edmund was none the wiser to the nefarious intentions his wife had planned for their family. He read a romance novel and thought of the endless possibilities his life would bring once Laurel was out of his life. He hoped to find a love that was reciprocated and find a woman who wouldn't betray him and his daughters. He even brought the book with him to the table because it gave him hope for the future. Laurel took the first bite of the meal to urge her family to join in. She felt a morsel of regret as her family joined in, but she could not turn back now. Very soon, she would be the only surviving member of the Bennett family. It brought Laurel joy as she watched Catherine eat the food she'd prepared. She was only member of the family who Laurel felt no affection towards and would not miss. A wave of sadness filled her heart as she watched her youngest daughter take a bite of the turkey. She wished that the circumstances were different and she could have spared her dear Evangeline. Edmund is last to take a bite of the meal. He makes a face of dissatisfaction when he tasted the food, but as he continued to eat, nothing was happening. He nor the girls showed any signs of discomfort or pain. Laurel had been sold faulty product. Edmund baked a cake for his Katie girl the month following their trip to his parents' home. She was aging into a child today, despite the terrible circumstances their family was under. Edmund wanted to make it special. Edmund feared for the future. It brought a shiver down his spine. What would happen if his plan wasn't executed perfectly? Still, he put on his biggest smile to celebrate his beautiful Katie girl. Happy birthday, Catherine. Catherine's childhood trait is that she is a hothead. I wonder how this will clash with her mother. Edmund was so excited to have his Katie girl another life stage older. Their bond was only growing. She was the source of his strength and often gave him kind words to get him through the day. Laurel couldn't stand the fact that Catherine was a child now. She could fully talk, and Laurel couldn't stand to hear the sound of her voice. Catherine was very intelligent for her age. She was reading and comprehending books way above her reading level. She dreamed of one day going to boarding school to receive an excellent education. Laurel did not like that her daughter was so smart. If Catherine was smarter than her, then she could figure out her plans to get rid of her family for good. She also did not appreciate the confidence that Edmund was instilling in her. She had to right the wrong that her ridiculous husband had started. Laurel was ruthless towards her eldest daughter. She insulted everything from Catherine's physical appearance to her minor speech impediment. Laurel also made a point of spending time with and dote on Evangeline in front of Catherine. She hoped that it would drive a wedge between the sisters and also make Catherine feel unloved. Edmund saw the detrimental effects that Laurel's insults caused in his Katie girl. He was making strides in moving them out of the house, but Laurel's paperwork had mysteriously disappeared. He showered his Katie girl with compliments every chance he could get. He couldn't bear Catherine having lasting adverse effects of having Laurel as a mother. He loved her so much and wished he could take her pain away. He also saw how intelligent Catherine truly was. He encouraged her to pick up extra assignments from her teacher to get ahead. He wanted her to get into the best boarding school no matter how much he would miss her. Laurel was sent into a panic when she began to have morning sickness. If she was the child, it was not Edmund's, and she knew that with certainty. They had not been intimate in over a year. Laurel read Evangeline to sleep every night. It wasn't because of her affection towards her, but instead to avoid Catherine and Edmund. She was paranoid that Edmund was up to something because he no longer looked her in the eye. Catherine liked to be around Nurse the cow when her mother was rude to her. The bovine leaned against her as if to comfort her. It felt nice to have a friend, even if it were only a cow. As the weeks passed Laurel by, she missed her monthly and began showing. She was pregnant with Nathaniel's baby. She couldn't pretend this was Edmund's baby and move forward. Laurel had to act fast. Edmund would soon notice Laurel's swollen belly and figure out that she stepped out on their marriage. He would divorce her and send her back to the asylum. The only option was to silence him forever. She would figure out what to do about the girls eventually, but Edmund posed an immediate threat to her right now. He had to be dealt with and quickly. Edmund was frustrated that the asylum was not acting faster. He broke Laurel out in the first place, and now he was being punished for it. He hoped that his girls wouldn't be punished for his major lapse in judgment all those years ago. Edmund and the girls arrived at Clyde and Emily's home after a long day of traveling. It had been years since Edmund had been to his childhood home, and all of his memories with Fletcher growing up came flooding back. Edmund hugged his mother for a long time. He didn't realize until that moment how much he needed his mommy. He told his mom everything, including the affair between Laurel and Nathaniel. He also told his mother of the rumors spoken about Laurel's reason for being in the asylum, which he had kept a secret from everyone. Emily urged him to get out of the home and take the girls. His only priority was to keep Katie and Evie safe. The house was owned by Edmund, but Laurel could always come back to that home and wreak havoc. Laurel did not know where Clyde and Emily lived. She suggests that he and the girls move in until Edmund gets back on his feet. Catherine and Evangeline played with the toys that their daddy played with when he was their age. They listened to the conversation between their dad and grandma, although they were too young to understand, and the severity of the situation. Evie even missed her mother. She heard words spoken by her grandma and daddy like loon and dangerous when describing her mother, but that didn't change the fact that she loved her very much. Emily hugged her granddaughters close. She had already missed so much of their lives and didn't want to miss a second more to bond with those beautiful and intelligent girls. Since Katie girl was older than her sister by a few years, she understood more of what her father was talking about. She also experienced firsthand her mother's rage and anger towards her. Edmund read a book to Kate to calm her down. Emily took little Evie girl outside to play while Edmund calmed Kate down. She worried for her granddaughters. Having a woman like Laurel as their mother could cause them irreversible psychological damage. She wanted to shield them as much as she could. Clyde got home after a long day selling his woodworking pieces to the absolute best gift. He hugged his granddaughters closely and felt so blessed to be able to see them, not just hear about them through letters. Clyde was very happy and relieved to see his only surviving son. He worried about him constantly since he witnessed Fletcher pass away. Edmund told him of the plan to move he and the girls in. He reassured his dad that everything will be okay. Clyde was very excited to have his son and granddaughters move in. Much of his joy in life was gone now that his children were out of the house. Edmund explained his plan to take the children and go. Edmund had to get his affairs in order and make arrangements to send Laurel back to the asylum. He promised he and the girls would be with them permanently in 3 months' time, and if they weren't, to come searching for them. Edmund sat down at his brother's grave and spoke to him for the first time in so long. He carried Fletcher with him in everything he did, but talking to a ghost was too hard for him sometimes. He asked his brother if he was doing the right thing. All of the stress from the decision to officially end his marriage and visiting his brother's grave had really got to him, and he dissociated for the first time in a long time. He was so out of his mind that he even thought he saw his brother's ghost. Emily read a nighttime story to her granddaughters and got them ready for bed. Normally Edmund's dissociation would alarm her, but she knew how stressful this was. She had been through it with her first husband. Laurel was enjoying the time away from her family. It reinforced her want to be rid of them for good. She just had to be smarter and more calculated with her next attempt. Laurel received a letter from Nathaniel stating that he was in town on business. She anxiously awaited his arrival. She hoped to convince him to leave Agatha by showing him things in the bedroom that Agatha could never give him. It had been weeks since her primal need was satiated, so she and Nathaniel spent his entire stay in town in the bed that she shared with her husband. Edmund was so excited to get his girls out of this house in a few short weeks. He had finally heard back from the asylum and they would be retrieving Laurel in a week. He eased his daughter's worries by reading to them. He was most excited to see how his Katie girl would thrive once she was out of the grasp of her mother. She was such a smart and loving girl, and her light could finally shine bright if away from Laurel. Her daddy was her favorite person in the world. She shared her dreams with him, and he always encouraged her to follow them. She would never understand how her kind and gentle father fell in love with her wicked mother. To help her cope with her anxiety, Edmund taught his daughter how to knit. Catherine was around the same age as he was when his mother taught him. This was a bonding experience for them, and it reminded Kate that she wasn't alone. Although Edmund and his girls were planning to leave soon, he could not tip off his wife that anything was amiss. He still fixed the appliances around the home, even though it was a waste of time. The first snow of the season came to the Bennett residence. Catherine watched the snow fall and couldn't shake the eerie feeling she had in the pit of her stomach as the snow began to stick. Even though Laurel was spending more time with Evie again, She still refused to do any actual childcare, so this was Edmund's time to spend with his Evie girl. He had noticed subtle changes in Evie over the last few weeks. She was an impressionable young tot and was mirroring her behavior after her mother. She was mean to both Edmund and Kate because that's how her mother acted. Laurel continued to escalate her foul comments and general lack of respect for her daughter. She spoke horrid things to the girl, especially when it was just the two of them in a room. Kate felt defeated that her own mother had such nasty things to say about her. Maybe she should start believing them. As bedtime crept up on the Bennett household on the day of the first snow, Evie read her bedtime book to herself. Her mother had not come in to read it for her. Kate also got ready for bed by herself, but she knew her daddy would be in to kiss her goodnight as she was falling asleep, as he did every single night. Tonight was no exception. Edmund tucked his Katie girl in and kissed her on the forehead. He whispered that he loved her so much and their luck would turn around soon. Edmund had an honest conversation with his wife. He informed her that he knew she had an affair with Nathaniel, and that he could tell that she was with child. Laurel became very defensive with that accusation. She insisted that she was a faithful wife and she loved him. She explained that she was pregnant with his child because they had been intimate while he was in one of his states. Laurel's rage could not be contained in that moment and she slaps him across the face. Edmund, suddenly terrified of his wife, apologizes for not believing her story. It was very plausible and he told her that he looked forward to raising a third child with the woman he loved. Edmund explained that he was tired and they would talk more about how they would fix their marriage in the morning. In reality, Edmund would pretend to be asleep until Laurel actually was and then take the children and flee. Laurel knew that Edmund did not believe her. She knew that he was up to something and he had to be stopped. She grabs an axe and tries to use it to save herself. Very reminiscent of her own family's end, Edmund blocks the hit before it can make contact. He is frightened and can finally see what she is capable of. Before Edmund can run away or plead with his wife, Laurel tries again and is successful this time in her attempt. Edmund's last thought is of his girls. He falls to the ground, limp. Laurel knew this had to be done and she felt alive doing it. Laurel went through a plethora of emotions as she looked at Edmund on the ground. She did love him once and she was shocked when a single tear fell down her cheek. She had to clean up her mess. After placing Edmund in his final resting place, she scattered seeds above the unmarked grave. No one would know where he was, but at least beautiful flowers would sprout there in the spring. Catherine was woken up by a nightmare that same night. A nightmare illustrated the most devastating things. Kate went downstairs to talk to her daddy. He was the best at calming her from a nightmare. Instead, she saw her mother walking in from outside, and she was covered with a thick, dark red substance. It brought a shiver down Kate's spine. Laurel cleaned herself up in the bathtub after everything was finished. She had eliminated her biggest threat, but she was not out of the woods yet. She needed to get her story straight and get ready to run if it went south. Laurel sat on the bed that she used to share with her husband and ran through all of the potential scenarios in her mind. Edmund's parents would surely come looking for him, and maybe Agatha. They had to flee quickly. Her first thought was to either leave the children to fend for themselves or to give them the same fate as Edmund. However, she could use them to her advantage. She could more easily calm people if she presented herself as a poor single mother. She went to bed as the sun was coming up, and it felt nice to have the entire bed to herself. She knew Edmund being gone was for the best for everyone. Catherine and Evangeline woke up to a quiet house. Their daddy was nowhere to be found and their mother was sleeping. Kate played dolls to give her sister some normalcy and to keep herself from freaking out. Evie became sad that their daddy had not come into their room for their morning hugs. Kate gave her sister the biggest hug and told her that this would have to do for now. Evie began to ask a plethora of questions as to where their daddy was. She was used to her routine and did not like to stray from it. A lump in her throat grew with each passing moment that their daddy was not there. She remembered the dark red substance on her mother last night, and a sinking feeling flooded over her. She shares what she saw with Evie even though she doesn't understand its implications. Catherine searched around their home while her mother was still sleeping. She knew that her dad kept letters of correspondence with her grandma and with her aunt. Finally, she found them hidden under the kitchen sink. She read every letter front to back, and the contents confirmed what she was fearing. Her daddy had planned on leaving with she and Evie for fear that her mother would hurt them. She also learned how her daddy met her mother. Kate allowed herself to cry freely for a few moments. Her daddy was likely no longer with them and her mother was responsible. She feared for her own safety. In the days following, Kate felt helpless and unable to hold herself together. Her daddy, her favorite person in the whole world, was gone. She wished she could have just one last hug. What would she do without him? Back in Brindleton Bay, Emily rereads her letters from Edmund. His departure date was written clearly on the page, and yet he and the girls were 3 days past due. She feared the worst but continued to write to him. Clyde felt that his only surviving son was gone. He had no proof, just a feeling in the pit of his stomach. He could not share his suspicions with his wife for fear this would send her over the edge. Their son was her life. After a week and still no arrival from their son and granddaughters, they traveled to their son's home. There was no sign of their son anywhere. They both felt a sinister presence as they walked into their son's home. The sinister presence was their daughter-in-law. This was the first time they officially met her, and her aura was unsettling. She claimed that Edmund left she and her daughters for another woman. Emily knew this to be false. She knew that her son would never leave his daughters in the care of Laurel. Emily demanded to know where her son was and what Laurel had done to him. Laurel stuck to her story. Laurel stated that she was already in a fragile state because her husband left her to raise 3 children on her own, and Emily was upsetting her. She asked Emily and Clyde to leave or she would get the police involved. Laurel left the room and Kate clung to her grandma. She whispered that her daddy was gone and her mother did something to him. She was sure of it. This confirmed Emily's worst fear. Clyde kissed the cheek of his eldest grandchild and promised they would be back to collect the children as soon as possible. They would get the authorities involved and speak with the asylum. They would be back. Emily sobbed as she hugged Evie. She saw her son so much in his children. She had to be strong for those girls, but she felt so heartbroken that her son was gone. Kate gave herself a comforting pep talk in the mirror after her grandparents left. She hoped they would be back in time, but she knew her mother had something planned. What would happen to she and Evie if Laurel took them and fled the area?